Lerner is a big name in environmental circles in the Midwest. He's been active for quite some time. He established the Environmental Law and Policy Center, and this is considered to be the leading environmental legal advocacy and eco-business innovation organization. So I think I've known him for at least the time I've been here in the Midwest. And anytime there is any talk about renewable energy, anytime there's any talk about new charges by utilities, Howard's name immediately pops into the discussion. He is a lawyer by training, has very nice credentials. He also is an adjunct professor at several law schools, including University of Michigan and Northwestern. And he got his law degree from Harvard, and he's originally from Michigan because that's where he got his Bachelor of Arts degree. I invited him because I wanted to get essentially some exposure to our students of what's going on in public interest forums in Illinois in terms of the legislative moves and also the developments. And I thought that he would be a very good one to bring us up to date in terms of what's going on. And I think many of you will be interested in what he has to say. So I'm happy that all of you came to listen, and I hope you will get something from this presentation. So the only thing we can now do is get some drum rolls going. Certainly, there's always some excitement with any of these seminars, and I don't know if it's necessarily technology excitement.
I have something to say. This is for all the grad students. I'm working on the Power Affiliates report. So for those of you who have not sent me your abstract, please do that. And if you have any questions about it, contact me or talk to your advisor about it. Thank you very much.
That letter of request went out to all the students?
Yes, it did.
Okay. So tell me what is still available in terms of dates for the seminars, please.
Okay, we have March 15th.
Okay.
And it looks like the only other date is May 3rd.
Okay. And everything else is doubled up, or most of them?
No, actually not. Now we do have a PECI meeting on the 29th. Siobhan's going to do the March 8th by himself.
Let's start because Howard is available. Howard, you're welcome to share the screen. Okay. And to put up your presentation.
Will do. George, how does it look? Can you see it pretty well? I hope?
We can see it, but I think what you want to do is make it a full-size presentation. You seem to have something else on the right-hand side.
All righty, let me make this work well for you, okay? Boom.
Anybody can give a suggestion what we need to push?
Hide presenter view. Here we go. How's this?
Okay, that's good. This is good.
This is good?
This is very good.
All right, everyone. My apologies for the little bit of a technical difficulty here. I'm glad to join you. And thank you, George and Robin, for inviting me. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly, but please interrupt if you have questions. Better to have a conversation with you than for me to be talking away at you. So just interrupt with a question. Let me know if there's something you want to talk about. All right. Here's our basic premise, that focused policies and technological innovation are what's driving fundamental change in the electricity sector. And that's what we do at the Environmental Law and Policy Center. We work on policies that shift the markets, align with economics and technology to achieve environmental solutions. Within the environmental community, we're often referred to as pro-technology environmentalists. As many of you know, that's not uniform, but it is the way we see the world, and that's healthy. Different groups see things different ways. Some are comfortable with more technology and innovation. Some have different views. At the Environmental Law and Policy Center, we are pro-technology and pro-innovation in terms of accelerating solutions. So 3 big game changers that are happening in the electricity market. I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail. Number 1, energy efficiency, best, fastest, cheapest solution to climate change problems. It's driving down sales and demand. That isn't changing. If you look at utility data, if you really dig in, power demand is going down rather than up. And it's going to continue going down, for example, as light bulbs go from incandescents to LEDs. People in this class probably have all LEDs in your homes and apartments. There are a whole lot of incandescent bulbs still running that are going to go out. That alone reduces electricity load, about 90 to 95% switching out incandescents to LEDs. You'll hear more from me about energy efficiency. Saves people money and businesses money on their utility bills, reduces pollution, creates jobs, keeps money in the economy. That's a win-win-win-win. Number 2, renewable energy is now rocking in terms of numbers. Wind power clears the market in terms of central generation. Solar energy plus storage is as disruptive to the electricity system as wireless services have been to the telecommunications sector, which has changed the way we live, the way we work, the way we play. And on renewable energy, you're talking about zero fuel cost, zero risk that way, essentially zero pollution, and something that's scalable to fit the needs in different communities. Building a nuclear power plant, building a large fossil plant has a much longer term projection. As you all know, it takes a lot more time, and it really locks one into a future. Renewables is fast and it's scalable. Third in the market, shale gas, natural gas outcompetes coal and nuclear. And that's likely to be the case for at least the reasonably foreseeable future. We did this graph almost 10 years ago, and it was our view of not what we wanted to happen so much as what we thought would happen. And we've turned out to be pretty much right. The blue at the top is energy efficiency holding down demand. Demand has gone down. The red is nuclear, and our forecast was there might be a nuclear plant or 2 that shut down. Most would keep running, and that's been the case. Yellow, of course, is gas. It's coming into the market. Green is renewables coming into the market, and the black is coal. And what we've seen is that coal has gotten squeezed as more gas and renewables comes in and nuclear stays constant and efficiency holds down demand. The market factors along with regulatory standards are driving out coal. There's about half as much coal operating now in the Midwest as operated 10 years ago. This chart was a forecast. It turned out to be more or less correct. All right, so let's go to efficiency. Best, fastest, cheapest climate solution, saves people money. Efficiency is a money saver for businesses' bottom lines and for residential consumers on their bills. And what we're dealing with right now is essentially a negative electricity demand. And that's not likely to change relatively soon. Some of it's economic driven, some of it's technology driven, but even if you take out the last year in which obviously commercial sales have been hit by COVID-19, residential's gone up, people working at home, commercial has gotten hammered for reasons we all understand, but that flat and declining sales reality has not really been internalized by PUCs, by legislators, analysts, and others. But if you look at the data, that's what's happening. And we're basing this not on theory, we're basing this on utility data. ComEd, AEP, Detroit Edison, et cetera, demand is flat and declining. And that's because efficiency is working. The three largest uses in most people's homes are air conditioning, cooling, refrigeration, and lighting. And depending on the individual customer, one might be more than the other. You all know what's happening with lighting, the switch to LEDs, 90 to 95% more efficient than incandescent. Refrigerators today are far more efficient than they were 10 years ago. And refrigerators tend to cycle out, according to DOE data, about every 11 years. So about 9 to 10% of refrigerators turn over each year. And those that are coming in are much more efficient. It's not a matter so much of George going to the store and saying, I want to buy the one that's the most efficient. It's a matter of, if you go to buy a refrigerator, every one you look at today in Best Buy, wherever you go, is much more efficient than the ones before. Some of that's because of policy, the energy efficiency standards the federal government has adopted and some states have done. And some of it's just due to technological improvements. And the same is true with all appliances, HVAC, LED screens, big screens that people have to look at their TVs. What used to be a TV set is now a big screen. The efficiency of those from Toshiba and everybody else, Samsung, far more energy efficient. Same is true with HVAC in commercial buildings, pumps, motors, everything is more energy efficient. So when you take a look at all that, LEDs and solar plus storage and all the other efficiency stuff reduces utility sales. Those technological improvements, some of which are driven by policy, some of which are driven by better engineering, are reducing sales. That's just what the facts are. And for those who might say, yeah, but look at those EVs coming in. And we support electric vehicles coming in. It's very, very hard to see how electric vehicles are going to accelerate in the market fast enough to offset the technological improvements on all the stuff we've been talking about here in terms of efficiency. Just some quick charts on LED market penetration. Okay, we're using here, these are DOE numbers, I believe. Oops, here you go. You would think that by 2020, 2/3, 3/4 of the bulbs would be LEDs. The fact of the matter is it isn't, okay? What's really going on is the huge number of old incandescent bulbs and CFLs that people have installed in their homes, boxes of incandescents they have in their attics and basements. And even when you go out to 2030, we're still going to be looking at, in the residential sector, almost 1/5 of the bulbs still being incandescents. I mean, there's a tremendous opportunity to accelerate LEDs in the market. And what that does is it reduces demand, it reduces carbon, it saves people money. I mean, look, to install an HVAC system, you have to have technical skills. To install an LED bulb, hell, a lawyer like me, I can install an LED bulb. Screw it in, screw it out, okay? I mean, the amount of sort of lost opportunities for carbon savings and people's savings on their electricity bills is tremendous with LEDs. We ought to accelerate it. Wind power, I think, as everybody knows, has soared. Almost 20 years ago, ELPC did a report called Repowering the Midwest. It was the clean energy roadmap to develop wind and also solar in the Midwest. The amount of wind power was less than 1,000 megawatts at the time. It's now about 45 gigawatts. I mean, this is the curve of wind power development in the Midwest. And, you know, it's the Nike swoop, if you will.
Well, Iowa gets more than 40% of its energy from renewables.
That's right, George. The two states here, great trivia question for you, you know, when you need one, folks. The two states in the country that get the most amount of the percentage of their generation from wind power are Iowa and South Dakota. South Dakota is just below Iowa. It's between 30 and 40%. They have a lot of hydro, wind, a little bit of coal. I think they get a piece of a nuclear plant somewhere, but it's almost 75%, I think, is hydro and wind. But it's soaring. And at night, when electricity demand is relatively low in the Midwest, there is a huge surplus of wind and nuclear, which are must run. I think you all know wind power runs in the Midwest about 70% at night, 30% during the day. So at night, if you have a wind farm, you want to run it wherever you can, and the production tax credit for wind power only gives you an economic benefit if you're running. So at night, we are just sluicing nuclear and wind power into the market, and there's far more generation than there is demand. So that's why we're going to have nuclear plants or wind back off and curtail. There simply isn't enough demand in the market. There's some things we can do. You can give people incentives to charge their electric vehicles at night, something we've been encouraging. That's a win-win. If you have your car in your garage and you charge at night instead of during the day, then you're helping to sop up, if you will, some of that excess supply, which is low carbon, wind and nuclear. Some of the utilities have been resistant to doing that, in part because they make a lot of money buying power cheap at night and selling it at a higher price to consumers. Solar is growing. And if you look at that wind curve, well, here's what we're seeing on the solar curve. This is US data. Again, it's just between 2010, 2023, it's that sort of swoop going up. 2024 and 2025 depend in part on policy and in part on storage. But same curve as wind, you know, goes right on up. Same curve on solar. And this is Wood Mackenzie data and SIA data. The numbers are what they are, okay? What's driving that in part? Policy is driving it, customer demand, people like solar and want it, and the price per watt of solar has dropped like a rock. Simply put, solar generation goes up while the price of generating it goes down. Economics 101. And that's technological improvements. I mean, that's about just the efficiency of a solar panel. PV solar panel goes up every year by about 1%, 1.5%. That drives down the price. The value, same point. So what we're looking at on solar is the price of it coming down in terms of systems over the next few years. And while 94 cents to 77 cents in one way may not seem like a lot, as a percentage, that's about 20%. That's a 20% price drop. You know, you're not looking at a lot of other things dropping 20% in price. This is data that we got from Lazard's annual piece, the lowest cost of energy. And what we're seeing now is that the levelized cost of new build wind and solar, that's this, is just competitive now with existing generation. So when you're looking at 32 cents, 38 cents, et cetera, to give you a comparison, the Quad Cities nuclear plants running costs, I'm not talking about capital costs, simply the marginal cost, according to Exelon, is 3.2 cents, fuel plus variable O&M. So you're looking at solar competing with that, and solar being available when it's needed most, when it's hot, when we're at peak times. Again, this is Lazard numbers, but the same point. Wind, solar, price just coming down. I mean, you know, look at the solar price in just 11 years. You know, it's gone down by a factor, whoops, back up a slide. It's gone down by a factor of, 10, 42 to 394. Okay, 9.5 or so. So what does this mean? You know, in terms of Illinois' economy, it's good for jobs, it's good for economic growth, it's good for the environment. Almost 300 companies engaged in solar energy supply chain, 200 in wind. You can read the rest of the slide here. That's a lot of businesses, that's a lot of jobs. More people these days in clean energy than in coal in Illinois. It's not even close. So what do you need to do to make this work and keep working? We need a renewable energy standard in Illinois and other states and nationally, and President Biden's clearly proposing one. And policies like net metering that make solar fair and make solar work. Solar plus storage is a complete winner, and it's going to begin working even more when you're talking at the community level on distributed generation technologies. I don't know how many of you watch the Mythbusters show on Discovery Channel. My kids do, I do from time to time. So let's talk about some of the myths. Coal is needed to keep demand, to keep reliability. Not really. Half of the coal's already shut down in the Midwest. Most of the rest is on the bubble. There's really not much load growth. Efficiency is working. Renewables are coming in. There are going to be a few coal plants running that are highly efficient plants. Most of them on an economic basis will shut down. They simply are not economic in today's market. Myth number 2, all the nuclear plants are needed and are economically competitive. They're not. If all the nuclear plants were economically competitive, Exelon, for example, wouldn't be coming into the Illinois legislature and asking for subsidies. Nuclear today, new nuclear today is not economically competitive. The plants in Georgia and South Carolina were financial disasters. Old nuclear, in some cases, you have plants that are running efficiently. They're making it. And you have some plants that simply aren't needed in the market today in the Midwest. So you say, all right, but they're low carbon. They are. They have radioactive waste, but they're low carbon. So the question is, if you're going to do public subsidies, how do you allocate the funds? Do you keep them? How much do you need to keep the older nuclear running, assuming it can be run safely, versus if you took that money and you invested it in efficiency and solar storage and wind, would you be able to get more clean power? Those are the economics you need to look at. So we're clear with regard to new nuclear. I'm interested. As I said earlier, we tend to be pro-technology environmentalists. So far, the current new nuclear plant designs that have actually gone to commercialization have not worked very well. The numbers just don't work or come anywhere close to doing it. And no utility CEO would go to his or her board and ask them to authorize building a new nuclear plant unless they were using other people's money.
So last week we had a presentation on the microreactors.
Right.
And, but I don't think we have yet anything which has been NRC approved in the US. I think Canada, province of Ontario, is a little bit ahead in that direction. But I have great hope in terms of the nuclear prowess of these microreactors, because they may come out to be pretty efficient after we get them to be the stamp of approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
And I think, George, it's going to come down to economics.
It will.
And as I said, at least the way I look at the world from the Environmental Law and Policy Center, we ought to be open to the so-called new small modular reactors.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
You got to look at it and say, there are a lot of smart people working on them. Let's see what the technology is. And then let's see what it's really going to cost. And if that turns out to not work or be way too expensive, then let's see what the next design is. You know, we ought to hold it to how good's the technology, how well does it work, how safe is it, how efficient is it, and what's the cost. And if somebody can, if you will, build a better bread box, we ought to be open to it. And we're going to see what works and what doesn't work. And that's, you know, that's the innovation process. That's the lab process. That's not everything that people try to invent in the lab works well. And some of it works spectacularly well, you know, and that's innovation. We ought to be open to innovation. And we also ought not to assume that every innovation is going to work really well. So there are a lot of smart people, very good engineers working on nuclear. Let's see what they can design, and let's see how it works, and let's see what it costs.
But can any governor today in any of the Midwestern states run on a platform that he'll shut down that non-competitive nuclear? I don't think that would be necessarily a safe platform to run on.
Oh, I think you've seen, you know, for example, in Michigan right now, the Palisades nuclear plant is shutting down. You know, Michigan is a pretty competitive state politically, George. Governor Whitmer is up for a tough re-election. President Biden, former President Trump, fought pretty hard over Michigan. The Palisades nuclear plant is an old nuclear plant where the economics weren't very good, and it's shutting down. Yeah. Vermont Yankee shut down in Vermont. You know, there's a plant shutting down now in New Jersey. I think it gets down to both safety and numbers.
Yeah, the economics is very important, but we've seen also Ohio and Illinois, how those things can also result in outcomes that we don't necessarily have to talk about in this presentation.
Well, what we've seen in Ohio and Illinois is a lot of stuff. What we've seen in Ohio, for example, is the Ohio Speaker of the House being indicted for RICO and fraud and corruption. First Energy under a black cloud with a SEC investigation. And the former chair of the Public Utility Commission of Ohio being resigning, but being effectively removed by the governor because First Energy, the utility, gave him a $4 million consulting contract payment shortly before he became chair of the commission. And I think anybody in Illinois knows what's been going on in Illinois. So, you know, we're going to see what happens. But to go to your question, George, are there governors who have said there's a nuclear plant that's economically uncompetitive, we're going to let the market work? The answer is yes. That's happening in New Jersey. It's happened in Vermont. It's happening in Michigan. And I think you're going to see some other plants shut down and some plants keep running with public subsidies. You know, it's not going to be a one size fits all. But if you look at the markets at night right now, wind power in the Midwest clears the market. Nuclear can't compete with it.
Right.
And during the day, solar and storage is going to, with the prices going down to where they are, is really going to take those, you know, sales, you know, the peak sales that provide a lot of revenue for a lot of companies. Hey, just sort of the last piece here in terms of, you know, all transmission is good, myth number 3, because it will only carry wind and solar. And as they say on Mythbusters, wrong, okay? Some transmission carries mostly wind. Some transmission is really a lifeline for fossil. So if you're an environmental group like ours, we don't start off again with all transmission's good or all transmission is bad. What we're looking at is, number 1, what is that transmission line likely to actually be carrying? So for example, in Iowa, you pointed out, George, quite right, that 40% of the generation in Iowa is wind. There's a little bit of nuclear too, but about half the power being generated is fossil. And a lot of that is being exported to the east. So those transmission lines are not just carrying wind, they're carrying a lot of fossil. And if you're an environmentalist and you want to see some of those old coal plants shut down, and you see a transmission line that's going to serve those coal plants, that's something you want to take into account. You also want to take into account where the line is going. Point being, it's not one size fits all. You have to look at each of the lines and what is it carrying and where does it go and what's it really going to do. And sort of my quip of the year, and it's at the bottom of this slide, every state in the Midwest, as you suggested earlier, George, has a really hard time shutting down plants in its own state. And the answer for all of them is nope. In North Dakota, they say, instead of shutting down our old lignite coal plants, let's export the power to the east. Minnesota, Xcel Energy is saying we really don't want to shut down our nuclear plants and we want to build a new gas plant where we used to have the coal plant at Sherco. We got some excess power, we'll export it to the east. Iowa wants to export to the east. Everybody wants to export to Illinois. And let's keep in mind, Illinois right now has a surplus capacity of about 40 to 50% that we want to export in Illinois to the east. You know, there's a fundamental market problem there, is summed up on the bottom of the slide here. Everyone wants to export, but all the states look to try to protect their own. So that's hopefully an interesting, I hope you think it's good, and in some ways maybe a little provocative summary of how we see the power markets in the Midwest. And if people have questions, suggestions, feedback, fire away.
So what keeps you up at night? What are the challenges you see in the next 5 to 10 years in the Midwestern states?
You know, the sorts of things that keep me up at night, George, are what I'll call the catastrophic things. Look, we can figure out ways to evolve the power market that sort of ramp up solar, ramp down fossil, some of the older nuclear plants phase out. Things that concern me are nuclear plants that are built on the shores of the Great Lakes or on rivers at a time where climate change tells us that we have much higher floods. We have derechos hitting Iowa and Illinois. We have record high water levels in Lake Michigan. I mean, there's a set of risks out there. We just read something today about the New Madrid fault line. Some scientists saying it has a higher risk of seismic institutes than some others were saying that has been said in the past. What leaves me worrying is, are we really prepared for the sort of extreme weather events that climate change is at least helping to exacerbate, and the effect on our power system? Where that takes me is we ought to have a power system that is on balance, more decentralized, to be more climate resilient. And that means, where do we build microgrids? You know, how do we develop brownfields to bright fields, solar plus storage? How do we put storage on more rooftops, whether it's in Champaign-Urbana and university buildings, or on old brownfields and community centers on the west and south sides of Chicago? If we have an entire system these days that's built on very large central generating plants and very long transmission lines and pipelines. And if there's anything we've seen from Texas, and we recall the ice storms in the Midwest, is that's a very vulnerable system. So we need to have a system that's a little better balanced between distributed energy and central. And I'm not one of these people of small is beautiful and close down all the central plants and build an entirely new system. But we got to get some more balance in the system in terms of climate resiliency. And we've seen that happen. It's what happened in telecommunications. I mean, truth be told, you go back 20 years, we relied on a phone system. Remember those plug-in modems? Some of you have been around a bit. You know, we relied upon a phone system that was landlines and poles and wires. And today we don't. So, I mean, we need a more resilient, balanced system.
And is the Midwest moving on this sufficiently quickly? Are there policies underway that you see being developed, or are we basically moving too slowly, given the likelihood that those climate change impacts are going to be equally meted out in various parts of the world? We saw California in terms of the fires. We saw the whole event in Texas last week, which was tremendously disappointing for a vibrant market.
You know, George, I hate to be trite, but that's sort of an easy answer. We got to move faster, folks. We are moving to, look, Mother Day, we had 4 years of the Trump administration, whether you like President Trump or not. Fact of the matter is his policies when it came to climate change set us backwards. And the fact is Mother Nature didn't take a pause for 4 years. So we're playing catch up here, folks. What's going on is extreme weather events in ways that are more intense and are straining the system, as George, you put it, whether it's wildfires in California or record lows in Texas. And our infrastructure wasn't built to deal with that. So that's why when you asked, what do I worry about at night? It's the nuclear plants and coal plants that are sitting on the shores of the Great Lakes and on our rivers, because they have to be in a place where they have a lot of access to water. And they were built at a time where they didn't take into account the sort of extreme weather events we're having, and tornadoes and flooding and derechos and higher water levels. And that's a system that's at risk in terms of climate. We need to accelerate both looking at the current electricity system in light of climate realities, and we need to be building out a newer, more climate resilient system. And that's about the allocation of capital. You could say it's all going to be win-win, but the reality is, if you own an old coal plant and you're trying to make money off of it, you're not part of the solution going for the future. If you're investing in solar and storage and microgrids, then you are. And the former are going to try to make as much money as they can, as long as they can. And the latter want to move things faster. And how we allocate capital, regulatory policy decisions that remove barriers, that lessen regulatory barriers to solar plus storage, help transform the system quicker in the way you're discussing, George. By the way, I think it's the ultimate irony of the world, by the way, that if you sort of think about where people are positioned in sort of classic economic political terms, I'm describing to you a system that favors innovation, new technologies, removing regulatory barriers so you open up the market to more competition from newer technologies that are cleaner. And the companies that own old coal plants or otherwise uncompetitive nuclear plants are sort of the state socialists acting for subsidies. I mean, in classic political science terms or economic terms, that sort of positions the parties pretty interestingly.
So this is a slide,
yep,
which I put up when I discuss what's going on in coal, of how uncompetitive it is.
Yep.
Okay, so this is a slide that I use because I took this story from the Washington Post. So everything you say is absolutely true, and I don't think there's really much future to coal, not only here, but actually true worldwide, except some countries don't have any choice and they just have to continue. And that's what's still going on in much of Asia today.
Yeah.
And even in Africa.
George, as you know, the slide there is April 6, 2017. President Trump was elected in November of 2016, and he said he was going to bring back the coal industry.
Yeah. And this is why that was very timely.
Right.
Because
exactly. And it hasn't happened, and it won't happen. I don't have the slide in front of me, but basically coal mining in Illinois went down by about 30% in 2020 compared to 2019.
But
that's thermal coal. That's thermal coal.
I'm involved in the, I'm an advisor on one of the policy projects going on, research project of what we're going to do with those communities. And when I say about nuclear, I think we don't want to add more communities, because those communities in Illinois which have nuclear have some of the best equipped schools in the country.
Yeah, the basic question you have to ask on that, and I get it, if you're Byron, Illinois, you have benefited for years from ratepayers paying Exelon, Commonwealth Edison, and part of the operating expenses being the property taxes. So if you live on the south side of Chicago, in your rates, you're paying to, in effect, subsidize the school system in Byron, Illinois. Now, lots of different ways you can make that argument, and I don't wish badly for the school kids of Byron. They ought to have good schools, but that's sort of complicated. And, we need to come up with a system that is a little more equitable in terms of how do we share those resources.
So let me ask the students if they would like to ask some questions.
Do I have concerns about battery recycling and disposal, Adriana? Yes, I do. And Argonne Lab is doing a lot of work on lithium batteries and ways of recycling them. And I think it's going to start happening, lithium batteries being the principal batteries, as people know, for electric vehicles. I think there's going to be more recycling because, frankly, lithium is becoming a shortage. So the businesses that are engaged in the field are going to have a value in terms of getting it back. But absolutely, you know, we ought to be able to find ways of doing better battery recycling.
You know, one of the things which is going to be a plus there is that we can repurpose those EV batteries to go into storage, and those charging stations which have yet to be built will have storage associated with the renewable energy. So that's going to be a very good way to delay till that becomes a chronic problem.
Yep.
Why don't you guys use your microphones? You have a question?
Fire away, folks. Hopefully I interested you enough. Okay. What do you suggest best way for graduates to enter the technology field, to engage in policymaking process? Hey, couple different venues. First of all, places like Argonne increasingly are getting involved in policy. Interesting place, interesting stuff going on there. Secondly, university centers. I've been on the advisory council for the University of Michigan Energy Institute for a while. Terrific environmental institute at University of Illinois. They are more involved in the policy world now. Third, you have agencies in the federal government like EPA, like DOE, that really do have a pretty strong technology bent to it. US EPA has their National Research Lab in the Research Triangle in North Carolina. DOE has a whole team of technologists. And then finally, you know, companies like, you know, Invenergy, Sunrun, others are hiring engineers. They're hiring technologists to go along with the policy people. So I think you're seeing the field grow quite a bit in the governmental, the not-for-profit, and the for-profit sector. And I would hope that your career placement office and such would be aware of those opportunities. But it's a growing field. Now, a friend of ours used to be head of technology for GE. And at the GE Technology Center in upstate New York, the amount of talent there is just fabulous. So, I mean, you're seeing it in the private sector, you're seeing it in the public sector as well.
Yeah, important. And I think we need that engineering talent to get the right policies and not to try to get policies which go against Newton's law of motion or Kirchhoff's law.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. This was great, Howard. Very informative.
Glad to join you.
We appreciate your time, and we want to have you back on an update. So thanks a lot.
Good to join you all. Be well and enjoy the better weather. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care.